Okay, I think we can kick off as people are still joining. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Before we begin, just a quick housekeeping notes for today that we are recording this session, so you will get a copy of the recording, but just for your FYI, it is being recorded. And then in terms of the chat, we're going to make good use of that chat to engage. Your mics are muted, but you can put all your questions in, and we will be bringing Neil's attention to your questions as we go through the session. So my name is Colleen McClintock. I head up the OD space, and I'm thrilled to introduce Neil and this amazing webinar today. Colleagueship is a concept that invites us to think differently about how we show up with one another at work, not as just as professionals, but as partners in shared responsibility and performance. To help us explore this idea more deeply, we are delighted to be joined by Neil. Neil is a leadership and team coach who works with professionals and organizations to strengthen trust, connection, and performance. He brings over 2 decades of experience working with leaders and teams across sectors. He's a professional certified coach with the International Coach Federation and holds a master's degree from Stellenbosch in leadership coaching. And he's also a longtime friend of Omnicore and a sought-after coach on our executive panel. And we are very excited to hear what you have to share today, because Neil, just as we were waiting to start, I just mentioned that this is such a timely talk for the whole of the world right now. So we're really looking forward to learning from you today.
Great. Thank you so much, Colleen. And thanks to you and to Omnicore again for hosting me. It's always a privilege working with you and really just value the special relationship. And so today we're going to be talking about this very long word on the screen we see, colleagueship, which is not commonly used. It's been around though for about 30 years. It was introduced by Peter Senge, the MIT management guru professor who spoke about personal mastery and as the 5th discipline and defined the learning organization and the value of learning in organizations. And colleagueship is what I'm going to show you is why that is the missing piece in your psychological safety investment. And I'll start with an example that happened, probably the key, the most important and valuable training that I did using this concept. So it was during COVID, and I had been working with colleagueship for some time, a number of years, at a senior leadership level, and I was working with a pharmaceutical company and with their senior leadership team that had come together just pre-COVID, and we needed to accelerate and get them working together and familiar with each other. So we were doing this colleagueship piece. And then during the process, the CEO came to me and said, well, we've got this one team, it's very important for the business, but they are in extreme dysfunction. Like they're just not working together, highly toxic. And it's like every one of them is threatening to leave the very next day. So do you think this could work? So of course we said yes. I said yes. And we went in there and we did a process with them where we took them into this journey beyond psychological safety and into colleagueship. And the bottom line is probably it was about 6, maybe 8 weeks later when I got a call and she said to me, wow, she just cannot believe that this team has gone from probably the most toxic in the organization and dysfunctional that nobody gave a chance to now actually being a model of performance and functionality and working together smoothly. And there was the value of introducing that additional element to the psychological safety piece, which is colleagueship. And eventually we took that through the rest of the organization, the next level, right across Africa as well. And so I've seen this work in a number of environments, also with engineering teams, with logistics teams. And you'll see that the ones I'm mentioning are very hardcore technical teams in very high stakes environments. And that's really where as I take you through this, you'll see that psychological safety training starts to reach its limitations is in those high stakes environments in the very technical teams. And I'll explain more as we go. The bottom line is that this is not to negate psychological safety, very important as a concept and the value of the training in terms of being effective and efficient in delivering training. The question is about what happens beyond that that it works up to a point and what happens beyond that point. So just to be clear and fill anybody in case you're not aware where the psychological safety term and research comes from. So Harvard researcher Amy Edmondson did this research in the 1990s, I believe it was, and they found that in researching medical teams across various hospitals, the high-performing teams were also the ones reporting more errors, which seemed counterintuitive. But when they went into it, they realized that it was not that they were making more mistakes, but that they felt safer to report them. And so that created the valuable feedback loop, which we know is necessary for improving performance. And I always like to relate that when I'm doing a training in a corporate environment, I always relate that to sports people. So here, we're very sensitive about feedback in a corporate environment, but think about sports people. They do their job in front of millions of people. Recently, there was a game, Liverpool versus Manchester City, just a couple of weeks ago. I saw the reports. They said 700 million people watched that game. Imagine you're doing your job and you make a mistake in front of 700 million people. And that's not all. On Monday, you get back and you've got the video review with the team and the coach and everybody pointing out your mistakes. That's like serious business. And I always think, we've been doing this psychological safety training and coaching for 20 odd years. Surely we should have gotten people to that point at scale at some level. And yet I find that we're still struggling. We're still struggling to embed the psychological safety effects and benefits and behaviors. Well, we get the behaviors, but then we don't necessarily get that deep trust, and it tends to break down. And that's really where the colleagueship piece comes in. And as Colleen says, it's pervasive in the world right now. I think we could use it more broadly as well. Also, Google's Project Aristotle, they did some research 2012 to 2014 over 2 years. They studied about 180 teams, and they found that it's how the teams interacted rather than who was on the team that determined their success. So in a tech environment like that, you'd usually want to get the smartest, the best, etc. But they found that the critical success factor, again, was psychological safety, and which means being safe to take risks without fear. So therefore encouraging innovation. And so that shows that the research is valid, it's true, but there's a certain point at which it no longer works. And I would say it's a level of stress and tension. And if we translate that into an engineering term, if you think of a bridge, stress and tension, well, you can maybe build a bridge that carries pedestrians, but if you want to bring on cars and trucks or military tanks, you need a little different level of stress and tension that it can tolerate. And a lot of training, psychological safety training, doesn't quite have the tolerance for the kind of environments that people find themselves in the workplace today. And so that's really where we're going with this. And the definition that Amy Edmondson gives for psychological safety is this: the shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, allowing members to speak up, ask for help, or admit mistakes without fear of punishment. And so what we found is that the training, so when we talk about psychological safety training, we're saying, we take a band of leaders and we put them into a program where they learn psychological safety. And then we kind of parachute them back into their teams, and we expect them to show up with those behaviors. Or we take people into trainings and then we take them back into their teams. And so we tend to train those pieces, the how to speak up, how to ask for help, how to admit mistakes. But there's a key piece that's missing, or let's say that this works at a certain level of stress and tension, as I've said. So when the organization is at a reasonably healthy, it's not under extreme high-stakes pressure and environment, and maybe the team culture is healthy, then training can work. And it's at the team level that it matters most. Peter Senge said that team learning is the basic unit of learning for an organization. And when he talks about learning as a learning organization, he's talking about learning not in the skill sense, but in the sense of that feedback loop we talked about earlier that sportsmen go through, like feedback on your performance and using that to improve performance. And that's the piece where we really struggle. So the missing piece that training often misses is this one here, which is the shared belief. Shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So we can train all those behaviors, but we still don't have the shared belief, especially in those high-stakes environments. So when I say high stakes, usually it's literally life and death. So the medical stuff I was talking about earlier, or engineers. I've worked with a team, they're building a dam, for example, a tailings dam, that collects all the effluent from the mines, the poisonous effluent. And if that dam collapses, well, there's a town down river that's going to, where tens of thousands of people will be ill or die. So that's a matter of life and death. Sometimes it's a profit and survival pressure, and profit is related to survival. And sometimes in some businesses, I've seen that in some businesses where the business is changing fast, and if they don't stay alive and profitable, if they don't stay profitable, they literally won't stay alive. So these are the kind of high pressure environments I'm talking about. Or sometimes you genuinely get toxic bosses or toxic people. And these are all the things that can impact a team and an organization where the psychological safety training is not sufficient. And there where you need the shared belief that it's safe, but that breaks down, it's not in place, because I'll answer the because in a minute. Here's the gap that we see. So what we observe when this is the case is that we see that awareness has improved, the language has been adopted. So we go and we do our surveys and we see this. We see the behaviors demonstrated. We have this, the pulse scores are up. However, the corridor talk, the real conversations are happening in the corridor. Did you hear what he said? Well, nothing's going to change. I'm not bringing that up. Same old story. Those kind of things are happening in the corridor and the parking lots. And they're not happening where they should happen, which is in the meeting room. And why? Because firstly, the transfer problem, we know that a lot of training doesn't carry its way back into the workplace, 10 to 20%, some of the figures have shown. A meta study in 2010 showed that especially open skills like leadership, communication, EQ were susceptible to this transfer problem where the information didn't make its way back once we returned to the teams, and where old patterns tend to dominate, behavioral patterns. And the other thing to remember and recognize is that shared belief cannot be relied upon to happen spontaneously. So we can't train people, parachute them back, and then just think, well, they're going to somehow miraculously agree to work together and trust each other, and create that psychological safety, that shared belief that it's safe. A good example of this might be, I always think of like music bands. So you get some bands that, like U2 and the Rolling Stones, they've been around for like 40, 50 years, and they seem to have navigated their way through. But you look at others, the Beatles, for example, didn't last very long. Fleetwood Mac is a band that's been through, I don't know if any of you even know these bands, it's from my era, but they've been around for, through enormous changes, the band Fleetwood Mac, for example. So that's one example where it can happen spontaneously, but it's rare. So the U2s and the Rolling Stones of the world, what I'm saying is rare. Very much more often, they don't endure that long. They've become susceptible to not being able to navigate their way through these kinds of conflicts and maintain that safety. And probably the core reason for this is another quote, Peter Senge and Chris Argyris, who said that teams and organizations trap themselves in defensive routines that would become highly skilled at protecting themselves from the pain and threat posed by learning situations. So this is something I work with quite a lot, is those defensive routines. What are the defensive routines? The corporate environment is experienced as fundamentally threatening. I don't want to admit mistakes. I don't want to admit what I don't know. I'm always putting my best foot forward and making sure that I show the best side. I don't want to let you know if there's anything going on in my personal life that could be affecting my performance. These are the defensive routines, and they tie in with our personality, and we become very good at that. And psychological safety is about releasing that, letting go of that, and no longer having to protect ourselves from the pain and threat. Those are emotional words, from learning situations. And these are the things that live and breathe within teams. So when you do your safety training and you go back into the teams, you're hitting these defensive routines. If we haven't dealt with that, the psychological safety training loses a lot of its value. And so we have to get over that hurdle first. And we can see there that piece at the end, learning situations. So we know that psychological training teaches that. Mistakes are learning situations. So we get the language, we get the behaviors. but how do we get the actual change? We have to get people, I like to say, riding the bicycle. So here's my bicycle analogy on this. And sorry, just go back to that. So imagine we wanted to teach people to ride a bicycle, and we've got our medical folk and our engineers and maybe a few spies and soldiers and whoever. We're going to go and fight a war, and we're going to use bicycles. Why? Because we'll give them the reasons why. Here's our good reasons why bicycles are great, because they're quiet and, we can hide them and all these kind of reasons, whatever. So we give them the information. We teach them all the science of bicycle riding, and then we maybe put them on a spinning bike or let them try with training wheels. And then we send them off into now go fight the war. That's kind of what we're doing with psychological safety training to some degree. And so there's a missing piece there, as you can see. And what is that missing piece? Well, what is the core competency that is required for riding a bicycle that teaching cannot give you, that information cannot give you, even riding with training wheels cannot give you? And that is the element of balance. So balance is the key piece of bicycle riding that can only be learned by doing through experience. And once you've gained balance, interestingly, you don't lose it. And from there, everything else can flow. And so this is an analogy, obviously. And I'm asking, what's the balance equivalent in psychological safety training that is needed before you send people into the war zone? And if we were in the room together, maybe we would have a dialogue about this. I'm going to give that to you. First, let me just say that this aligns very strongly with the training that I have in ontological coaching, which is very much around shifting a person's way of being through insight. And that insight is delivered through a very particular process, which we kind of describe as walking a person around until they see themselves from the back, kind of in the act of creating the very problem that they're experiencing. But it's gained through insight, not through knowledge. So that's the whole point of this, is that you can give people the knowledge, and that here's the problem, that you do these things, but it's kind of sits out there. It doesn't resonate inside as like, oh, it occurs for me. And when you gain that insight, you can't ungain it. It shifts your being and your whole attitude. So that's what we're talking about here. There are two core insights for creating that shared belief and shifting people, which is the first one being this one, that I'm part of the problem. And so we know that, like in psychological safety, what's the key thing we're dealing with? Well, the whole thing with psychological safety is those defensive routines. So it means that I'm not the problem, everybody else is the problem. So when I'm sitting in the training, I'm learning all this stuff about how to manage other people. And I'm seeing the problem out there, and the problem is other people to be managed, and this is the skills I need to manage those other people. And even though I might be told or get it intellectually that, oh, I'm also one of those people, we don't really get it. As soon as you're in the situation, you start defending yourself. So the core thing is to take people on a journey where they get to recognize that I'm also part of the problem. And that's a key approach to the design of the training and the delivery of the insights. Not as information, but as insights. When I do that, I use a fairly standard model. I call it the low road and the high road of human communication, and I get people to see the low road and the high road. But I deliver it as part of a process where by the time it's done, everybody's kind of going, okay, that's me, that's me, that's me. And it lands as an insight, not as a piece of information out there. So that's one of the core pieces that is needed to get people to shift into being ready to take on that shared belief. The second shared belief that is necessary is that we're in this together. And that's can only happen when you are dealing with the people who you work with on a day-to-day basis. So if you do the training out here, you get all the information and you get parachuted back into the team, you're not getting that core collective insight, that shared insight that everybody gets together. We're in this together, because when you get that, it's no longer me managing other people. It's a different stance towards everybody. It's like, oh, we need to work differently together. And that can't be assumed either. It's not going to happen spontaneously. It needs to be contracted. It's a very deliberate, conscious process. And I'll explain in a minute how we get there, what the process is for delivering it. But those are the two key insights that are needed. So without that, psychological safety, without creating shared belief, can be like building a house but never adding the roof. Because you can see that if that roof doesn't go on soon and the rains come, a lot of what's already been built can get damaged, and then you're not getting the value out of the investment that you've already made. So your investment ultimately can go to waste. And that's the key piece. So what is that additional piece? How do we create that shared belief? That brings us to colleagueship. So colleagueship is the kind of the relationship that we have that creates shared belief and is sustained by that shared belief. And colleagueship was defined by Peter Senge as seeing each other as colleagues or friends and not adversaries, not adversaries to be managed, but colleagues, friends who will therefore, because of our stance towards each other, we will forgive each other's shortcomings and misgivings for being human, in other words. A lot of what we do in psychological safety training is we train how to deliver information, how to act towards somebody. The key piece is how you receive information as well. Like you're in a high pressure environment, in those high stakes environment with technical people who are maybe doing their best, but still not that skilled. I know for myself, I've been doing this for 20 odd years, and put me in the room with a teenage son and I can lose, all the niceties. So we are very human in that way. And we need to, when receiving that, we need to be forgiving of each other's shortcomings and misgivings for being human, for making mistakes. So this is about creating a safe space for vulnerability to occur and having a commitment to not hold things against each other. So here's the key piece. Commitment is not passive, it's active. It's everybody together. It's a shared process, shared belief. It can only happen in that way. And it's an agreement as well to put the team first. So when you say something, you're giving me feedback, I'm trusting that you're doing this because you're putting the team first. So therefore, I'm less likely to take it personally. And that's coming out of the stance that we have agreed to each other. It's not coming out of my knowledge that I received from my psychological training, or my safety training. So the benefits of this is that you can be confident that your peers' intentions are good, trusting that your vulnerabilities won't be held against you, have the freedom to act without concern for self-protection. And all of those things mean a smoother flow and less energy wasted on managing people and relationships. Because when colleagueship is absent, the first thing we see is entropy, the energy wasted on managing interaction. So it's always about who's going to say what to whom and when, and spending hours typing and retyping an email and then not sending it because you're worried about this, and how do I have that conversation? Huge amounts of energy get wasted in that. Another sign of the absence of colleagueship is dreading and avoiding meetings because nothing really gets said or done there. The real conversations will happen in the parking lot anyway. And then the reluctance to take risks and make decisions, which obviously if we're talking about innovative, culture of innovation, or we want to elevate everybody's level of work, learn to delegate and elevate the level of work, well, that can't happen without the psychological safety, without the colleagueship at the level of the teams, of individual teams. Conversely, in the presence of colleagueship, we'll see these things happening. We'll see people quickly and genuinely apologize to one another. They'll openly reveal their thinking. This is one of the key things. Remember, the defensive routine is we are good at protecting ourselves from the pain and threat of learning situations, and we learn to hide information to protect ourselves. And what we're protecting often is the layer of thinking behind what we're saying. So we present something. What's really going on is to challenge, well, why are you saying that? Well, my thinking is this, and revealing our assumptions. There's a whole piece of work done by David Bohm, one of the quantum physicists in the 1950s, around how they achieved the scientific breakthroughs they did in quantum physics. And he said because of the nature of the conversations or dialogue they had, and a key piece of it was how their willingness to reveal their thinking. Again, in technical and high-stakes environment, people tend to want to hold on to information because it's their professional advantage. They don't want somebody taking their position. And so this is a very risky thing for people to do. But in the presence of colleagueship, when we are trusting and there's contracting that it's not going to be used against me, then I'm more willing to openly reveal the thinking. So that's an absolutely key piece. People openly admit their weaknesses and mistakes. So like our sports people who can't hide it, we become a lot better at that when we have that colleagueship and we start to actively practice that. And the other thing is openly challenging each other. So this will be when people are like in a team high in colleagueship, a high-performing team, you will see open challenge. Sometimes it can look like conflict. The difference is being skillfully managed, both in the delivery of feedback, and if it's not as skillful as it could be, also in the receiving of feedback, that forgiving and understanding, as we said. And the other key piece, which is a very interesting one that Peter Senge says, is that in colleagueship, because remember he said it's a level of friendship, professional friendship, people know something about one another's personal lives and are comfortable discussing that. And that's often something that we get is, I don't want to bring anything personal. I don't want to make this personal. This is work. Keep work and personal separate. Older generations, much more like that. Newer generations, less so. But it's often a thing that's come up for me and often in those technical environments as well, because people don't want anybody to know anything, or we don't want to inquire about people's personal lives. Hold on to that. I'll show you in a minute why that is so important and the kind of things that have come up in trainings that I've seen around that. But it's a key piece as well. So how do we get to colleagueship? The concept is not complicated, as you can see. And in terms of the training process and delivery process, it takes a very short time. It's like, it's a very short time in the overall process, but it's kind of like the preparation for climbing Everest. When you climb Everest, you prepare for years, and then you go, it takes you 2 months to get to the Camp 4. And in Camp 4, you leave at like 2 a.m., you're up there by 10 o'clock, and you're back down again. So it's a very, very short, intense section that gets you to the top of the mountain. And the colleagueship piece is kind of like that. And there's a journey to get there to deliver it. It's kind of like you've got to prepare the soil, or if you're building, you're painting, 80% of the time gets taken with the preparation, same thing. So the process I go through is first an individual engagement with everybody in the team that is involved, and that's building trust with me, with the process, with me and with the process. Then somewhere during the first part is getting them to the core insight that I'm also involved here. I'm also doing it. So that can happen during the workshop, or sometimes we can have a longer lead-in where there's more individual engagements, and it can happen during that process through some coaching as well. Later on is putting everything on the table, like bringing the elephant in the room and really starting to get honest about what's going on in the team and with the, between us. And then that vulnerable truth-telling, which is that piece around letting people know what's really going on in our lives, that as well is a key piece. And then we introduce the colleagueship, the trust, right at the end. So to make that into a more linear journey, the first step, always doing an introductory talk to establish independence, that, me as a coach, I don't belong to the leader. I'm here for all of you. Doing some individual interviews to gather intelligence about what's really going on and to let them experience me, but also for me to experience them. Because the one thing with colleagueship is you might actually get some really genuinely toxic people in the team. And it's useful to be aware of that. And it's not easy to spot. They're the ones that will be saying all the right things. And I've been caught out a couple of times on this where people say all the right things. So I've learned through serious experience what kind of questions to ask to make sure that, is this person, actually just saying the right thing, or is there some substance behind it? And there's not much you can do. You've still got to go through the process. But those people who cannot tolerate an environment of truth and trust will work themselves out. And in doing that, sometimes you might find that the level of stress and tension actually escalates. So they create more drama. Why? Because they need a reason to leave where they can blame everybody else. So sometimes you've got to ride that wave. That's part of the journey. But when you get people into a place of honesty and trust, people who cannot tolerate that or don't want to tolerate that kind of environment because they need to have an agenda will find a way to work themselves out. It just might be a bumpy ride. There's probably some assessments and coaching along the way that happen, which also is more touch points for developing trust and getting to know people, bringing all that information, the personal assessments information and the individual interviews into the workshop and putting it all on the table where we then first get the insight, oh, I'm also responsible, I'm also part of the problem. Either it's happened before or on day one, and then we work through the real meat, the content. And then into day two, we get into the vulnerable sharing and the colleagueship contracting. So you can see that can be a process of a month to 2 months, depending on the intensity of the situation. And then some touch points beyond that to sustain it. One of the key things is in the beginning of the process, we do some safe sharing. So day one, your icebreaker, tell us about something that nobody knows in the team. And I'm always surprised at how little people know about each other, even at a positive level. I've had all of these. I was a national basketball player. I played the violin. I once ran a marathon. Nobody knew that about the people on their teams. And then on day two comes the key piece. And this is where we're starting to get vulnerable. And that is, tell us something risky that you would normally hide. And this is not like superficial play. Oh, once at university, I did some crazy stuff. We all did that. It's the stuff that really matters, that you really feel vulnerable sharing in, because you think that people might hold it against you because it might affect your performance or your reputation or something. I once had a business that failed. I once was part of a team that, got canned from an organization. Or I've had these ones where somebody was going through a divorce, 3 months into a divorce process, and not one person in the team knew about it. I've seen somebody who had a parent and a sister dying of cancer, and nobody in the team knew about it. So these are very important things, because we need to, when people share this stuff, they suddenly recognize that humanity in everybody else. Because until then, we've been in our defensive routines, presenting our best selves, and we haven't quite touched that humanity. And when you do this, you kind of get the sense that we're all in this together. That's where that key moment comes, that aha, that insight. Like if you make this really the vulnerable stuff, that's when you get the insight at a core level that we're in this together. But you can't do that too early in the process. You need everything else. Otherwise, you're going to expose people. You're not going to get an authentic sharing at that point. And so this brings us into the point where we introduce colleagueship. And that is the outcome where we start seeing each other as friends. So there's vulnerable sharing. And then we do this piece in the workshop. And again, it can't be trained. It's a stance that you have to choose. It can't be assumed. It must be explicitly agreed, and it must be contracted out loud in the room together. And this is not your team charter about what we're going to do going forward and so on. This is a core piece about agreeing to trust each other and have each other's backs and treat each other in those ways that we mentioned. It's specifically around trust. And what you'll find here as well, a key piece, is that often we assume trust is binary, like you either trust or don't trust. Well, I've never seen that. Everybody is somewhere on a continuum, and that's okay, as long as they're not at zero. If they're zero, that we need to deal with that person separately. But you'll always get somebody at 99, and I'm all in. It takes them seconds to declare that, and others are at 60, 70, others at 30, 40. And very often there's people at 1 or 2%. They're willing to put the toe in the water. As long as they're willing to put the toe in the water, then we can start. And we can say, okay, we can run with this. And most of them expect that it'll take them 3 months to get to 60, 70% or more. Very often by the end of the day, they're already there. And certainly by the second or third touch point, they're getting there once they start to see proof that everybody is sticking to what they've agreed to. So if we summarize this then, just the differences that we're seeing here: psychological safety, we're saying, is trained. Colleagueship is chosen. The psychological safety is assumed, and in colleagueship, it's actively contracted. The orientation for psychological safety is defensive, so we're about reducing risk by managing other people. Colleagueship is generative. We're transforming the relationship. Psychological safety is individual awareness. Colleagueship, a mutual commitment. Safety can exist in theory, but colleagueship has to be a shared belief between people. The promise, psychological safety, it should be safe to speak up. And colleagueship, I choose to have your back. And there's a metaphor. So it's a house without a roof, house with a roof. And that missing piece, colleagueship, is what makes the psychological safety training real. So what you can do, if you're going back, is to go and check for that. Do your teams have genuine safety, or are they performing it? Is it in the scores but not on the ground being observed? Where are the honest conversations actually happening? This will be your key indicator. Are they happening in the meeting room or outside? And have they ever explicitly contracted for trust? Because if your answer is no, you might have found a missing piece to the psychological safety benefits on the ground. And so that brings us to a practical thing that you can take away and do today. And I think with that, we can move into questions. Let me just share my information there. If you want to talk to me further, the website details, email address, you can also find me on YouTube and Substack on those with those handles on those platforms. So thank you.
Neil, we've got some very good questions. First of all, I think you've actually touched on this since the questions were posed, but let's hear your take on it. Any advice on how employees redirect corridor conversations into the right forums in a way that preserves trust and relationships? That's from Tara.
Can you just phrase the first part of that again for me?
Any advice on how employees redirect corridor conversations? So how do we stop the gossip?
Yeah, well, I think it's you have it. You can go and test it, and if you are aware yourself, you can bring about that influence in your impact in your team by going and testing it and being the one who demonstrates what an honest conversation looks like, giving the feedback. Also, redirecting the gossip is. I'm catching up with myself. So yes. Not agreeing to be part of it fundamentally would be a start. So not agreeing and ask and maybe posing the question to them: have you spoken to the person concerned? I guess that would be the ultimate response. There would be to redirect them back and let them know, have you spoken to the person concerned? And that would be a way of bringing an impact in the team. You as an individual bringing that impact.
But that does seem to be more of a systemic thing that needs to be solved also on a leadership level.
Absolutely.
Okay, Hilton, my question is, how do you get colleagues comfortable enough to say to someone on their level, that was just not good enough? Where is it taken as useful feedback and not as an attack? And I think you've spoken quite a lot to that in this contracting bit that you've added now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, there's a small chance that it happens spontaneously. You get a bunch of mature people together and they work that way. I've very seldom seen that happen and that it's sustainable. I really believe as in any relationship, but it really has to be contracted at some level that this is how we operate together. So yeah, it really is around that active, consciously contracting for it.
Okay, Keegan wants to know, are there consequences when colleagueship is interpreted or treated as friendship?
Not quite sure I understand. Are we saying if we lean too far into misunderstand what it means, that we start invading people's space or
yes, too far, Keegan says.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have seen some people get into trouble for that on various levels, but I don't think people want necessarily to be counseled or to have to get too involved, but I do think it's important to share and to know just that piece of being able to share something honestly and authentic helps you to own it and helps people to perhaps understand and support you in some way. If you're underperforming at a certain level, you need support and help. I think it's going to that level, but if we go beyond that, I'm not sure that anybody is really expecting or hoping for that to happen.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier is important. It's fascinating that you were mentioning examples that this person was going through a divorce and no one knew. I mean, that's shocking. So I think it's about, for Keegan, probably, how much do we talk on a personal level versus a work level? So that difference between being a bit cold versus, just knowing when the person, what your favorite hobby is and that kind of stuff, I guess,
Yeah.
Keegan.
Yeah.
So don't think there's any danger in that.
Yeah.
Kilson is asking, would it be correct to say that creating colleagueship should be a key skill of all leaders, creating a cohesive, honest team that can talk openly with each other? So is it a skill?
Probably yes. If we talk about leader as coach, it would probably be I would say the advanced level of leader as coach would be able to bring that about in a team. And so definitely it could be the leader themselves that does that, taking a coaching style approach to that.
And I have a question, Neil, and that is around change. So what we see often in the engagement surveys that we do is that there's so much change fatigue, and there's just churn. So as people come in and they start all the cycles of, forming, storming, and norming and all of that, new people come in the team. Do you think that is tricky to navigate, the change and creating colleagueship?
Absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, as soon as one person changes, you've almost got to start the process again. So the degree to which it's been accepted and is practiced in the team, a new person coming in might be able to pick that up and adapt very quickly and have to understand, but definitely beyond a certain point of change, then it needs to be introduced. So, and I think that's the point I was saying earlier, is surely we've been around doing coaching. Coaching's been mainstream for like 20 years. We've been doing this for a long time, but we haven't managed to reach it at scale, at a level where it's embedded in people's capabilities to do that at that level. So we're training, but we're not training the skill of embedding that within a team. So we should really be at the point where we're able to teach people to answer Hilton's question and yours, that leaders should be able to implement that in their teams actively. That's the skill perhaps that we should be driving towards, because a process like this is expensive. It's a big investment, and so it's necessary for those very important teams at a certain level. What I find is when you do this at a certain level, it filters downwards. It definitely impacts downwards, so that the higher the level you do it, the better, the more impact it has. But yeah, we should be training people to implement this as leaders in their teams. That really should be, I think, where we're at as coaches and facilitators in this process.
It almost feels like it needs to be an important part of onboarding. We make sure people have their equipment and their, the right access cards, but do we have proper contracting? You said this is not a team charter. And in a way, I think even if you just at the bare minimum have a team charter, it gives some sort of permission for individuals to have those open conversations. Would you agree with that, or is there something to add?
Yeah, I think there's, a team charter will flow from it, and often there's a little more involved in that. But this is a particular piece on its own, and then a team charter can evolve from that, and often involves other behaviors and other elements. But the core trust piece needs to be done on its own. And once that's in place, then the charter will be more meaningful, because we have the foundation for it and the accountability element.
And how long does this take, Neil, to get from a place of having a team that's, fragmented and not trusting and not working well together, to feeling that trust again? How long would you say that would take?
It depends on the team, but I'm saying, it's 3 to 6 weeks of, that initial process, those first few contact points. The big one that I mentioned, ironically, we had done an introduction, we had done 5 lens debriefs, and we were about to start the workshop. And then some of the people put in a formal complaint against the leader, and we had to delay that and wait for that process to play itself out. So in that time, we then added some coaching pieces, which were where we were able to really get in depth and create that first insight. So by the time we got to the training, it was very valuable. but I've done it in a shorter time period, 2 to 3 weeks, from that initial contact point until the workshop. And then always the follow-up touch points are critical, because we need to connect the dots between everything that went on there and the situations that they're experiencing. And I find that's often the missing piece, is just those additional touch points that enable us to connect the dots to our ongoing experience.
It sounds quick. That's amazing. Probably something I'd love to have asked Colinda is, how does stress impact your ability to trust? Because if you're feeling under threat from either, strategic changes, or we're living in an environment where there's so much change, how do you deal with stress and just becoming more trusting as colleagues?
Certainly my experience is as I said, that continuum. So some people are at 1% and 2% and others are at 99%. And part of the assessment that I would do would be a stress indicator, and being able to see, and I've never really done a correlation between whether the people on low resilience are also at 1%. I don't know. Might be interesting to look at that. But certainly there will be people who are, for whatever reason, at that 1% and 2%. But I think they're always surprised by how quickly, as soon as they start seeing the evidence of it, and when the team itself, because that is their primary interaction, when the team corrects itself, that can very quickly correct itself for them as well. They can very quickly recover from that. So they might have the external stresses, but that core one goes away.
Any other questions from the audience? I think this is quite a senior audience, actually, as I look at some of the names here, and I'm wondering, what made you join? What are your concerns? It's such a responsibility to create trust in, as leaders, and it's so easily lost. Any other questions? Fatima, what are some practical ways to engage someone who doesn't see themselves as part of the problem, aside from a charter? Very good question.
I think that's where the individual touch points come, and also the particular delivery of the training. So I spent 4 years as a training, I did my ontological coach training, and then I spent 4 years in the trainer, and ultimately became a trainer. And that was a very particular competence, was how to deliver insight to people who were perhaps resistant to getting that insight. And it is a training skill and technique that I believe is the ontological coaching approach is very useful at. There is a key piece, though, that you may get people who are simply resistant, and they will, and I've had this experience where they say all the right things, but they're not fundamentally making the change. And very often those people will work themselves out of the system. So they might create more drama, and that's when we think, oh, the process isn't working. But actually, it's because someone who doesn't want to take responsibility is going to continue to shift that blame, continue to create drama. And if you just maintain the rest of the system and continue to develop it, eventually that person won't be able to. They'll make a lot of noise when they leave and blame everybody else, but they will work themselves out. And that's been my experience. One way or another, they won't be able to sustain that within the team.
Well, hopefully also, before they work themselves out, maybe there's this, coaching space that you're speaking about, Neil, self-awareness. And I think you mentioned just really shining a light on helping people to come into the realization that they are part of the problem, because that is profound. And it was your comment about we're putting the team first. So I think for Fatima, it's also just moving perspective around what's the I and the me versus the we and this team that we're going to put first. And I really like that take. No easy answers, I suppose.
I would say like a very high percentage, like most often the toxic teams are not because there's somebody toxic in them. It's because they just haven't joined the dots and managed to find the starting point for the trust process. And it needs a starting point, and that starting point, it can't just miraculously happen. So that's where the process happens. And most people, I will find, will respond positively, even if they're resistant, that those coaching touch points and the the insights in the workshop will land for 90+ % of people. I would say 95% of people. I can probably think of 3 examples of individuals where they just did not get it. And every one of them pretended they were getting it, and in the background continued to create drama. And every one of them, and 2 of those 3, the other one we didn't complete, that process came to an end, but 2 of the 3 actually ended up leaving the organization. So that's been my experience with that.
Great. Any other questions before we wrap up? That was very thought-provoking, and I'm just thinking about your comment that people end up leaving the organization. Really important to look at why people are leaving and, you know, see how you make improvements systemically for the whole organization. But I think this is a very tricky one. It's not just one thing, as you're saying. Hilton made an important comment as well, which is it's not a once-off event. You know, it's about, I guess, contracting and checking in and really sticking to those decisions that you make, right?
Yeah, certainly. 3-month and a 6-month check. I do find that that this process completed, people really get so much value that they do tend to sustain it. But there will be some drop off, and inevitably there's going to be new dramas entering, new pressures, and typically, as we all do, we go back to old patterns. So definitely, there's value in ongoing touch points along the way. It's never completely over.
Susan is just saying thank you for the valuable insights and sharing, Neil.
Great, thank you.
Good. Okay. Happy to take more questions. Otherwise, I think that's a wrap for today. We will be sharing the recording with you. Very welcome to reach out to Neil. And thank you so much. I think this is such an important lens for leaders to be aware of. And definitely I've learned a lot as well. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Thanks, everybody at Omnicore. Yeah.
Thank you, Hilton.
Thank you.
Yes.